The numbers of victims it's outrageous, it's staggering, it's very haunting. So I don't understand why our governments, both in Canada, United States, and worldwide, are not paying more attention to this Indigenous issue. And the target of victims for trafficking and for violent crimes is Indigenous women all over the world.
They're asking for help, and this is a crisis. This is a big deal. We're losing our people left and right. I have to have my phone on GPS all the time so my family can track me down.
And missing and murdered Indigenous women, to talk about particularly on this day. This is a crisis, and tribal sovereignty and full funding so that tribes can keep people safe is not an option. We need to change the rules and make it happen.
Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, MMIW. This is not a new phenomenon. It has existed since contact. The only two Indigenous women the populace can usually name, Pocahontas and Sacagawea. Both were MMIW victims. After the only Indian Wars battle, most people can name the Little Bighorn. The Lakota and Cheyenne women sent General George Armstrong Custer to the afterlife in a manner that ensured he would respect women more than he did before his fabled last stand. The women remembered what had happened to their sisters. On November 27, 1868, after sacking Chief Black Kettle's village on the Washita River, Custer took 53 Cheyenne women and children captive. Their fate was to be held akin to livestock in a corral at Fort Hays, Kansas. Custer's senior officer, Captain Miles Kehoe, boasted in a letter to his brother that he took a Cheyenne woman he described as very pretty and quite intelligent, before stating that it is usual for officers to have 2 or 3. No, MMIW is not new at all. Since 2009, the U.S. Department of Justice has estimated that Indigenous women are around 2.5 times more likely to be victims of sexual assault when compared to the general population. 1 in 3 Native American women will be raped in their lifetimes. In Canada, First Nations women are 6 times more likely to be the victims of homicide, while in the U.S. that figure increases to 10 times. Among the general population of American Indian women, 67% of rapes suffered by Native women are committed by non-Natives. 80% of sex crimes on reservations are committed by non-Natives. And according to the U.S. Department of Justice, 86% of all reported sex crimes against Native women are perpetrated by non-Natives. 90% of pimps and traffickers of Native women are also non-Native. Yet due to the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Oliphant v. Suquamish Indian Tribe in 1978, tribal courts do not have criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians, enabling non-Indian perpetrators to offend with virtual impunity on Indian lands. Their crimes aided and abetted by a complex jurisdictional maze that entangles federal, state, county, and tribal law enforcement agencies. In 15 years of conflict in Iraq, the U.S. suffered 4,541 fatalities. In 2016 alone, there were 5,712 MMIW cases cataloged by the National Crime Information Center, a figure widely considered to be low due to underreporting and inadequate data collection. Of those 5,712 cases, only 116 were logged by the U.S. Department of Justice. On crime reports, Indigenous victims are too often categorized by race as other. But Indigenous women are not statistics. This is mom, auntie, sister, niece, daughter, cousin, and sometimes grandma. There are many victims whose names we do not know. One name we do know is Hannah Harris. The U.S. Congress designated Hannah's birthday, May 5th, as the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Native Women and Girls. Hannah was a Cheyenne woman, raised in the shadow of the Little Bighorn.
If we don't connect with our culture and the way we do things, we would be lost as Indian people. When you look at a person going missing, a Native person, there's a connection. Because after a person goes... After a person goes missing, it's like when you find them, just in our case with Hannah and Henny, you find them, but yet there's no follow-up on it. There's no help for the family, especially in the grieving process. Even to this day, Hannah's been gone for 6 years, and it still touches home.
My daughter Hannah Harris was born on May 5th, 1992. When she was very first born, I always remember how her hair used to be. It used to stick straight up like always say like a plume, how the plumes always stuck up and stuff, and I just fell in love with her right away. As we grew up here on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. Hannah, my little sister, she was kind of like the tough girl. Like she always thought she was tough and, she could handle her own. She was very, loving. She was really cool, like she was really well known. She was the type of girl that would go out and talk to people and have a lot of her cousins and family and friends wanting to hang out with her because, just that energy and that. She was also kind of like I said, like the fighter. So there was that side where, she never gave up on things. If she set her mind to it, for her, it was more of like, once I start, I can't stop. I gotta finish it. Her Indian name is Imshkihat, which means pemmican woman. She was just so excited for her baby to be born, and when she turned 21 years old, Jeremiah was 8 months old at the time. And so she stayed home a lot and she didn't go out, she didn't go anywhere. She always had her baby. We usually have a fireworks, 4th of July fireworks. That year it fell on a July 3rd. Around like 3:30, I told Hannah, and baby was crying and stuff, and I told her, Hannah, I'm really tired. Can you please go across the road to your uncle's house? Let me sleep for a little bit. Come back over, wake me up in a couple hours, we'll go to the fireworks. She said, all right. And then they left, and those were the last words that I've ever said to my daughter. That was the last time I ever did see her alive or anything. I woke up at 5 o'clock and I had to make it to work by 5:30 and open up the gas station at 6. And so at that very next day, 4th of July, the very first customer that walked into the store said, your daughter's car's parked up at Muddy Creek. Is she all right? And I was like, I haven't seen her. She hasn't come home. I don't know where she could be. So all day at work, I was asking around, have you seen Hannah? Have you seen Hannah? Everybody said, no, not since last night, and during that time, a cop walked in, and I asked that cop, I said, my daughter's car is parked up at Muddy Creek. Nobody has seen her. How long would I have to wait in order to fill out a missing persons report? Does she usually do this? I said, no, because she breastfeeds her baby. She should be home. How long will I have to wait? And he told me 48 hours because she's an adult.
In my sister's case, it was like we were pretty much doing what the investigators should have been doing. But we didn't know what we were doing. All we were trying to do was find my sister.
The cops told me she's probably out having fun, drinking, scared to come back home. If you guys are more than welcome to go and search for her on your own. But if you guys can't find her, we'll step back in on Monday.
You think that the cops are there to help protect and serve. Where were they? Where were they when we needed them? We were asking them. We were taking witnesses down to their cop station, asking them, can you please write this down? Can you please take their statement? Can you please do this? And not once did they even take it as they just took it as a joke. Oh, she's just probably drinking. That ain't no excuse.
And I called the FBI myself and I told them I didn't want anything to do with the BIA here. I told the FBI, I just want you guys on this case because they weren't willing to help me out when I very first reported her missing.
It was a husband and a wife that killed my sister. He was raping my sister. And the wife got mad. And so then the wife went over there and strangled my sister. I know she put up a good fight, but he was too big. He was too big, and there was two of them. And after they were done, they panicked. They didn't know what to do. They went and borrowed their son's car, put my sister into the trunk, and that's when they took her out and they got rid of her. They just threw her out.
After Hannah was found, 2 weeks later, the chief of police walks into my house and tells me, I don't believe that this couple that you are accusing of killing your daughter is capable of doing this.
We literally were doing everything, from picking up my sister's car. I snapped some photos before we even touched the car. We tried to use it for evidence, but they said everything that we had touched, contaminated, and everything they could not use because, they needed to pick it up. They needed to write it down. But where were they? If it wasn't for that girl's aunt that had a heart, that came forward and said, I know something and I need to tell someone. She did the right thing. She did something that is normal. That's something you should do. No matter what the situation is, that's something you need to do as a person.
House Bill 21, Hannah's Act, passed here in the state of Montana.
House Bill 21 mandates that the Montana Department of Justice may assist in investigation of missing persons regardless of age.
It's really a tragic that we had to lose my daughter for bills to get passed.
Her light that she shined, it was really bright. And when she died, I took a piece of it. And that's something that that's something I hold dear to myself because just that, that love, that courage, that strength. I didn't want that to die when she died.
I remember going to some kind of historical presentation where they're talking about the voyagers and how they would keep an Indian woman in a trundle bed under their bed for their own purposes. And I was so appalled that anybody in the historical society would still be dramatizing that. like it was some great and wonderful historical event that happened. And I was really hurt because I'm an Indian woman and I was there with a group of school kids. And if I'm appalled and offended, think of what it's doing to their little minds. They're being taught that, oh, it's an Indian woman, all she's good for is sex.
You know, we're a matriarchal society as Piikani people. The women played an important role in all the leadership activities that were conducted, from the ceremonies that were held in the different times of the year. They also were heavily involved in the decision-making and the seasonal movements that we did as a people, because the women were the gatherers of the certain plants used for medicinal, used for ceremony. Old Bolshu passed on the legacy to my grandfather, and he passed on to his daughters, which was my mother and my aunts, about the leadership responsibility that women played in our society. And what he shared with my grandfather, the late Francis Bolshu, was that his daughters, my mother and aunts, needed to become leaders and educators on this Blackfeet reservation. Now I have nieces, I have great nieces and nephews that are in our school systems that are teaching now because of that process that was started by my mother, and them continue that what they learned from their grandmothers and mothers and so on. A distant relative of Ashley, she was a student here at the college when I was actually working here at Blackfeet Community College here in Browning, Montana. My granddaughters grew up with her.
It is reported that Ashley was last seen with a man up on Divide. It's actually just a few miles out of Abab. And the man did state that he was with Ashley, and then that he was going to bring her home, but she got a text message that her friend was going to pick her up, V-Dog was going to pick her up, and then he said he went to sleep and woke up and she was gone. So when we first started searching, it was reported from the same man that had her up in Divide and was also chasing her. She was running up Highway 89 going towards the Divide turnoff.
Ashley was at a friend's house in Browning, and she left with him. And they were together for 6 days around. And then that she called somebody to come get her. So they went to Divide, and he lives only 7 miles from there.
Ashley, one time, was out in Birch Creek area, and that there was a fight there. A eyewitness stated that she seen Ashley wearing this sweater, this gray sweater, and we found that sweater. That area wasn't searched, and it was later covered up within 2 weeks of when we found that sweater. It had holes in it, it was ripped up, it had oil stains on it, it had dried blood. But the thing was that we had tips that also stated that Ashley was put in a oil barrel, and that sweater was covered in oil. We found the sweater in between St. Mary's and Bab, right in the middle of the lake area. It is not that far from the man's house that was last seen with Ashley. It's probably not even a mile away.
But when it came to the investigations, we just weren't very informed by those were leading those investigations at that time, which was difficult because as in a leadership role and as a sovereign in tribal nation, you'd think that a lot of these things would come through you as leadership for that sovereign nation, as a tribe, and unfortunately that wasn't happening.
I first met with BIA, and I met with that investigator, and I met with him once, and then he said he couldn't help because he was going to a trip to Vegas that he already scheduled, so we weren't going to do anything and not to call him. We searched for 2 days, and then they stopped because of the weekend. That they said that they weren't going to search because nobody's on the payroll. And by then, it took just weeks and weeks to actually talk to a BIA. So we had to go out on our own and search and do our own investigation.
We were supposed to go explore the world together.
but instead I'm exploring the woods for my sister.
We later found out that the people that were working on Ashley's case were also involved with the suspects, and that hurt Ashley's case there. So
when Kim Loring talked, it gave me the chills because I was like, she's right. They did fail her, and it wasn't just tribal law enforcement. It wasn't state law enforcement. It wasn't BIA. It wasn't FBI. It was all of them.
We need to demand an immediate investigation into why the law enforcement has failed to provide information, failed to act upon information that they received from the Loring family.
The Blackfeet Indian Reservation is 1.5 million acres, and we have currently 18 tribal police officers on duty that patrol the whole reservation 24/7. There's only 2 Bureau of Indian Affairs criminal investigators to cover any major crime that's committed on the Blackfeet Reservation. Just sometimes have to shake my head because of when a major crime is committed on a reservation, our tribal police department responds to it first, and then in turn they notify the BIA criminal investigator. They come in, and then they're usually assisted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation due to it being on federal lands. Federal Bureau of Investigation doesn't always come up to the actual physical crime scene. So consequently, a lot of their information is taken from the reports that are received from the responding tribal officer and the Bureau of Indian Affairs criminal investigator. So we get a lot of, it's frustrating.
We've got 70,000 Native Americans in Montana. That seems a bit excessive to me, to not be able to find a few of them. And I know there's overlapping jurisdictions with tribal police and BIA and potentially FBI. But there's got to be a reason for this. And it isn't a database. I'm telling you that if you've got people on the ground that are following up, and I'm not a law enforcement person, I'm a farmer, but the quicker you can get on it, the better chance you have of finding what's going on. Are we really putting the kind of resources we need? Is the BIA putting the kind of resources? Does the FBI have the kind of resources to be able to get into Indian country and do the investigation, helping tribal police? But actually, you guys are the lead dogs here. I mean, truthfully. Do you have the resources to do it? Do you have the manpower to do it? Because it's not getting done, and if it's not that, it's got to be something else.
We have one suspect that is known to be involved with the MS-13 gang out of Washington. I believe that the reason why Ashley is still missing, or is missing, it is because of meth.
I know the main problem here on this reservation is methamphetamines. And then there was stories about human trafficking, that they sold my daughter. And the people that are involved are associated with people up in Washington, I found out, that do that stuff.
We see now that Montana has a task force on MMIP, multi-jurisdictional issues. And it's scary. It's scary because the things that are popping up are things like MS-13, the influences that they're showing. And seeing what's coming in from the western side, from Washington and Oregon, and how it's hitting Montana and going on down the High Line. It is very, very scary. It's unnerving.
The last 5 years, without a doubt, the methamphetamine in Montana is coming from super labs in Mexico. So we don't come across clandestine methamphetamine labs anymore in motel rooms or trailers like we used to. People don't realize the money to be made with methamphetamine. So a cartel can make a pound for about $200, and its first drop in the United States is about $2,000. So they're getting 1,000% profit on each pound. And then if you're from Montana and you have a good connect to California or Vegas or somewhere, you're going to pay probably $2,000 to $3,000 a pound. And then you bring it to Montana and you sell it for $700 to $800 an ounce. So you're going to quadruple your money. And the people that are buying the ounces at that amount are going to, say you buy an ounce for $800, you're going to sell the grams at $100. So you're going to triple your money also. And that's without even cutting it.
I'm very concerned about what's happening with organized crime. Unfortunately for the tribal nations, we have the gangs that come into our communities. We have that influence that they have upon our young people. And they basically look at our reservations as recruitment areas because of we're impoverished. And when they come into our communities, our people are high at risk of being recruited. Our young people are.
Hispanic gangs, Sureños, and even Mexican mafia most definitely are operating involved in drug activity in Missoula and on the Flathead Indian Reservation. A lot of people attribute MS-13 to Mexican cartels when they're totally different. So I think too, if you have local or resident gang affiliates who've never been anywhere else, when you have a big city gangster that shows up in your hood or your reservation, I think that's alluring, and then they associate with that person and they learn from that person. So would that person take them back to California, and would they be met by open arms? Probably not. But would they use them for drug distribution and connections and getting girls in Montana? Absolutely.
It's hard to fathom because it is such a beautiful area. You wouldn't think that organized crime is coming in here. It is. And it's because there's the northern corridor that's coming out of Washington. And with MS-13 being involved in illicit trades of all kinds of activities, bringing in methamphetamine, running weapons, and actually taking young women and basically enslaving them to enhance their drug trade, it's here.
When it comes to human trafficking, demand varies for different types of girls. So there seems to always be a demand for young-looking females, either minors or young-looking adults. But then there also is a demand for Native females, African-American females, and Asian females, and that just varies from area to area. Some of these girls are being exploited on reservations and then taken to the cities.
We sometimes see younger girls in the 12 to 13 age range, especially the girls that are involved with the Mexican gangs, being sexually exploited. And I'm thinking of one girl in particular. Though she hasn't said anything, we see her continually being dropped off by older gang members to school every day.
The first time I saw the film Wind River, it was hard not to feel very emotional because there are a lot of elements in that film that are accurate and really kind of highlight this confusing jurisdictional maze that we have in Indian country, and it really is a disservice to Indian people in providing fair and swift justice.
Life on the Wind River Indian Reservation is a struggle. It's a really big struggle for the individuals and the families as far as how we can get out. We need to have an opportunity to get past our limitations of resources, our limitations of job opportunities. There's a lot of limits that are set at those reservation boundaries that we as Indigenous people or Native communities deal with. We have a lack of attention towards our economic development. It's really hard, and it's a struggle for our elders, the women, the children, and the men of the community that are really trying to fight hard to keep their families intact and keep that fight on the front line and make sure that they're protecting them.
In 2010, I received a phone call from U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell's office, and they asked if I would serve on this national bipartisan commission called the Indian Law and Order Commission. And the commission was created to develop recommendations to Congress on how to make Native America safer and more just. My commissioners and I, we set out to visit every Bureau of Indian Affairs region in the country. We had no agenda, we just sat and listened. And after listening to all that testimony, we developed a report that was about 300 pages and came up with 40 or more concrete ideas of how to address crime in Indian country. And so these issues aren't new, and unfortunately I've heard firsthand some of those really gut-wrenching stories that you hear. There are a lot of reforms that need to be done at the federal level, but that's not always feasible. So our report recommended a number of what we called workarounds to try and make the existing system that we have work better. When it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women and Indigenous people in general, I get asked this question all the time: why? And I think you have to really step back and understand your history, and the circumstances that we have in our country have been centuries in the making. In the late 1800s, Congress passed the Major Crimes Act, which provided federal enforcement over certain crimes such as murder, manslaughter, and sexual assault, and very serious crimes. But that interjection of the federal government to prosecute those crimes has continued. Now, anytime you have an interracial crime, you need to know where the crime occurred, the race of the victim, the race of the perpetrator, and the nature of the crime in order to determine whether the tribe, the federal government, or the state has jurisdiction. And so it should be no shock that when someone goes missing on a reservation, those key elements are missing. We don't know if a crime had occurred, we don't know where it happened, and we don't know who did it. When folks ask me after they see the movie Wind River or they watch the TV series Longmire, there are a lot of questions. Why is it this way? And it's a very long history to explain, and it's complicated. And so once you start explaining all these laws and Supreme Court decisions, you can see folks' eyes glaze over. And so I think in our country, we're used to quick answers, and we're used to seeing, what act is going to fix this problem today. And as someone who's worked on these issues on and off throughout my career, I can tell you there isn't a quick fix. We need to look at how Indian country operates in general, and some of those ideas go back to when this country was founded. In Indian country, we've seen some tribes who have financial resources really make some aggressive changes and help strengthen their communities, and it's all involved healing and intensive work. And in doing some work on this on the Wind River Reservation, we worked on a bill last year that was just passed and just took effect on July 1st. One of the things we heard was Wyoming didn't have a law specific on Amber Alerts and how we are going to handle missing children who are endangered. So I learned a lot throughout the process of working on that bill. And one of the things that we heard was, there are a lot of instances where we have runaway Indian children, but they are eventually recovered, so they're not considered missing children under the federal criteria. But the broader question is, why were they running away?
A lot of the Indigenous girls that I think go into urban settings such as Casper or even bigger city population areas don't really identify with what dangers could be out there. Getting in there and being really excited and, to say, hey, I'm outside, I'm gonna do whatever I want and, run with it. And then finding out later on down the road, you're gonna run into predators and you're gonna run into dangerous situations or put yourself in dangerous situations, not understanding how much you're endangering yourself.
So I know of at least one case in which a girl from the Flathead Indian Reservation was taken to a city in Washington and trafficked there.
There is, on the law enforcement level, an awareness of the presence of the drug cartel here, but I don't think your everyday mom on the street or your grandmother sitting at home is aware of that or believes that it's here and that their relative could be a victim. We know that these people come into our communities and ally themselves with, different tribal members. And then, people get into drug debts and, all that follows. What we have to remember is that behind every one of those stories is a human being, and it's a girl or a sister, a daughter, a mother, herself, or it's someone that has the potential to be a life giver.
People don't realize that human trafficking is actually the second leading criminal enterprise on earth today, only behind drugs, but ahead of weapons. And the unique aspect of human trafficking is a human as a reusable commodity. So if I have an ounce of meth and I sell it for $800, I have 8 Benjamins, but I don't have my product. If I have a girl and I can sell her for $200 a trick over and over and over again. So if I'm selling one girl only 3 times a day at $200, I'm making $4,000 a week, I'm making $15,000 a month. And unfortunately, these girls are with a lot more customers than 3 a day. So the money to be made in sex trafficking is sometimes even greater than drugs, and I think the risk of detection is much lower. The police aren't kicking in your door when you're trafficking girls. So the drugs that come into Montana, western Montana, definitely have a Washington, Spokane, Yakima, California influence. And, you know, there's usually Mexican gang members who are involved in the supply of it getting here. So in Jermaine's case, I do have one of the investigative theories involves some Hispanic gang members from Washington.
It's hard to take Jermaine serious because she was so goofy and silly all the time, playful, constantly playful. She was a grown woman, but she was childlike, very innocent, and she was a beautiful mother. She had 2 little boys. She has 2 little boys, Thomas and Jacob. I knew from the moment that she saw Thomas that she was going to be an amazing mother. And she was, and is. I think one of her greatest gifts that she had to offer was not a horse whisperer, but an animal whisperer. She was fearless when it came to animals. She just wasn't afraid, and they responded to her. She does have a profound reverence for this earth and knew that it was her mother. She loved being outdoors, and this was home to her. She practiced her culture. She danced at the powwows, and she appreciated her culture. And she loved every part of it and wanted to learn as much as she could.
So shortly after midnight on June 16th, it was a Friday, June 15th, 2018, this is the alley where Jermaine Charlo was last confirmed to be alive. So she was documented on Missoula Housing Authority video in this alley, and there's a bar behind me at the opposite end in which she was there that night, as with a couple other bars in the Missoula downtown area. And she left that bar and walked eastbound in this direction down this alley, and that was captured on video. She was with a person whom she knew from the past that evening, and they were both documented together at this location. So there's 3 investigative theories involving Jermaine. And one is she was trafficked. Another one is that she was involved in some drug activity. Both those 2 involve non-residents who had traveled to Montana involved in illegal activity. And the third one is that she was with someone local who she knew. So those are the investigative theories.
Jermaine embodied being a young Native woman.
You know, is this a direct assault on our women? You know, we see the extraction industry, you know, raping and destroying our earth. And it just sickens me to see that and to know what goes along with that, the human behavior that goes along with that. What comes with the oil fields? A man camp. What comes with a man camp? Human trafficking. So it's all related. And what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves.
This crisis that we're in, this is a worldwide crisis. This isn't just North America. Women and girls are victims all over the world. And this is directly related to the extraction of our resources. There's no difference between being like trafficked and violated women and what's happening to our Mother Earth.
Do I believe that there's a connection between the rape of the earth and the rape of women? Oh, you better believe I do.
There's got to be an understanding of the spiritual deficit that's happening in the world. There is such a disconnect. Our elders will teach you that the toughest journey you'll ever have is the connection, the road between your heart and your mind. That has to be connected. And if it's not, then you're out of balance. You know, we have 4 bodies, right? So all 4 of those bodies have to be healthy and working in tandem with each other. They're all interrelated. So, you know, you take care of one, but you don't do the other. You don't feed your spirit and your soul. Then that keeps diminishing while the rest expands. So then you're controlled by greed and lust and you know, the desire to control and dominate. And that's what's happening in our world. The sacredness of a woman. We don't exist without women, you know? And Creator gave that job to women. They are next to Creator. They're the highest being next to Creator. And the fact that we're not being taught in regular school systems and in our society to hold women up to their sacredness, that is, I think, the root of the problem.
When they found gold back in the day, we know that a lot of our women were at the mercy of the merchants and those that were looking for gold back in them days. But the modern gold is oil and gas. And unfortunately, when industry moves into our country, as it did back then in the precious minerals, so to speak, and more today in the fossil fuels, that same process unfortunately still happens to our women. For some reason or another, the women are targeted, and it's very unfortunate, and it's really difficult for us as a tribe to deal with these things, because a lot of times they're here for a short term and then they're gone, because that's how industry operates. They're only there for a short term, but the impacts that they leave and scars they make on our people are long term.
The demand is created by the consumer. So the Bakken seemed to have inflated prices for both drugs and girls. So
when I was housing secretary, I had the opportunity to travel to Williston, North Dakota, which, as you know, was in the middle of a shale play a couple of years ago, to hear some of the concerns that members of the community had about the changing nature of the community because of the man camps. I would work to make sure that the communities that have been there, that are part of the land, are safe. And that even as people come into work, that we ensure that community residents are able to have safety, and that rules that would normally apply to other places if somebody moved into a neighborhood also apply to these man camps.
What would go for a price in Spokane or Missoula or Billings, you could double that in the Bakken for girls. And then with narcotics, you could almost double or triple that in the Bakken. Supply and demand driven, and sex never goes out of demand. So many times a pimp is working on his own. Other times they work in groups. And then of late, gangs have become more involved in trafficking of humans.
Some Johns want to role-play colonist and colonized as a part of prostitution. One likes my hair down, and sometimes he calls me Pocahontas. He likes to role-play like that. He wants me to call him John. Others say, why don't you go back to the res? Go wash the brown off of you. They say degrading things during and after. They expect us to tolerate racist and verbal abuse. You don't get paid if you talk back, they say.
I know one of our drug task officers has talked about going to places in Washington or places along I-90 because they've heard that the gang members are trafficking young women, and they are taking advantage of young women from reservations because they know that they're not going to have to face law because of the jurisdictional issues. There is a fear in the community because I think that there are people that know that there is a huge correlation with the drug use and with gangs and them taking advantage of the vulnerable population, which is runaways or people that are in addiction, and that it's typically these girls that are going missing.
Interstate freeway systems in America are used 24/7 to traffic drugs and humans, and I-90 is the northernmost freeway in America that runs between Seattle and Minneapolis.
They've said from Billings all the way to Spokane, Interstate 90, there are young women being trafficked all along there. I know that I've talked to young women that have said they won't ever stop if they're alone. Even if they have their kids with them, they won't stop anywhere because they're afraid, because they've heard stories about what could happen.
Sadly, I think I-90 is that second highway of tears.
MS-13 is the gang that our tribal law and order has talked about.
The MS-13 issue is really the underlying, because of the dealings that they do in human trafficking. in the drug trade. As time goes along, I think that we're going to see more and more just how deeply entrenched they are with that.
Crow Agency is bisected by I-90. At exit 495 is Hardin, a reservation border town once best known for Fort Custer, which overlooked the confluence of the Bighorn and Little Bighorn rivers. Now Hardin is in the headlines for MMIW and MMIP cases along the Second Highway of Tears. The death of 18-year-old Kisira Stops Pretty Places, whose body was found August 29, 2019, dumped in a yard on a Hardin Street corner, prompted County Attorney Jay Harris to create a Bighorn County Missing Murdered Persons Task Force. Data gathered by the Sovereign Bodies Institute indicates that Kisira is the 27th known case of a missing or murdered Indigenous woman in Bighorn County, and the 134th in Montana since 1990. Crow tribal member Hub Williamson was last seen alive in Hardin on April 9, 2019.
My son's name is Hub Williamson. I had a really strong gut feeling that something was wrong. And my daughter called me and she said, Mom, did my brother make it home? And I said, no, he hasn't shown up yet. He's got a little girl, and I have her. And she walked up to me and she said, Mama, don't cry anymore. Daddy's not coming home. The sheriff for Bighorn County, he has a feeling that this is big, that it's got a lot to do with drugs, meth. And that's a really big problem here on the reservation. I have been hearing rumors from different people that my child was murdered, chopped up, put in a suitcase, and hidden somewhere. That's what I was told. Who does that? Who does that to a human being? Who does that to a life? He had a family. He's got little girls, he's got a son, and he's got a mama that loves him and cherishes him. And what are they thinking, that we don't care? That I'm not going to say anything? That I'm going to let them get away with it? No, that's not going to happen. I want them caught. The BIA law enforcement are not helping me, and the FBI, they are not helping me either.
Are people that lost loved ones that were missing. We had some elders that they went to, and they directed those people where they would find their missing person. We don't have it today. Our medicine men are not here anymore. We tried to do it, but they're gone. Those things are gone, people. We're trying to bring them back, but it's far away.
I think a lot of the young girls that are runaways, that are out of foster care system, they're all vulnerable, but they're daughters and they're mothers, and they're not just statistics, and they're not just throwaways. They're people that we all care about.
If there was any crime that you would think it would be perceived to have the fortitude and do the right thing, it would be for a missing and murdered woman, right? I mean, it boggles my mind, the response that law enforcement has done in some of these cases. I mean, I never crossed my mind to do anything different because Jermaine Charlo was a Native American. I mean, I've done everything I can to find her, and you would think that any investigator would treat a missing Native American woman or a murdered victim like you would want your daughter, your wife, or your mom treated if they were a victim. I mean, my job is to find the truth and make a case and hold people accountable who have wronged somebody. And oftentimes, in a missing persons case or a homicide case, you're the voice for that victim. They unfortunately are no longer around to speak. And so your investigation has to speak for them to hold the person accountable. So I can understand why people would be mistrustful of law enforcement if that's happening in their community.
$243 million women and children were victims of domestic violence just last year, in 1 year. 50 million women and girls every 3 months just during this COVID-19 epidemic. And the UN warned us. They let us know 2 months into the lockdowns, they let us know that there was going to be a shadow pandemic. Now, this shadow pandemic is what they're labeling like the increase or explosion of domestic violence. That is the shadow pandemic, and it's been going on, and it is very scary. What we do know is sexual predators, they don't social distance. Human traffickers and drug cartels, they don't go on lockdown. And pedophiles, they don't self-quarantine. So what if she is isolating with her abuser? We have to think about that. It could be our cousin, our auntie, our sister, our neighbor.
When most people think of Native Americans, they think of the Lakota or Navajo, tribes from the Great Plains, deserts, and the Rocky Mountain West that they are familiar with through movies and pop culture. They don't think of Louisiana as an indigenous homeland. The Coshada Nation, like many other tribes, is a reminder of the diversity of Native American nations, and that the United States was once all Indian country. Irrespective of where we are located, the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls crisis is an existential threat to us all. We do not know the full scope and tragedy through data. Here in Louisiana, our Coshada people are categorized by coroners and the Louisiana Department of Health and Vital Statistics as other. It is as if we do not exist, and that somehow our women and children are invisible. There is no accurate accounting of MMIW victims here in the state of Louisiana. Sadly, this situation is replicated throughout Indian country. Tribes need to be clear about what is needed. Federal legislation needs to be passed and fully funded. The Reduce, Return, and Recover Act was a proposed bill the late John Lewis wanted to see introduced.
Saying that this is an unlawful assembly, you have to disperse.
When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to do something, to say something, and not be quiet.
It would be the most comprehensive MMIW legislation.
You can talk, but nobody listens. And we intend to change that. We intend, if there's anybody, if it is not you who should be involved in determining Native American policy in the United States, then I don't know who should be involved. Certainly not a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington.
The Reduce, Return, and Recover Act is an act that we have to get through and assure that we provide the services that are needed in any country.
It goes beyond Savannah's Act and is based upon the amendments to Savannah's Act that were submitted to members of Congress by the Tribal Alliance of the Global Indigenous Council, the Rocky Mountain Tribal Leaders Council, and the Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association. Those amendments the tribes on the front lines wanted were not included in the final bill. The media reported that the sponsors of the bill feared that those amendments cost too much to implement. So I ask, what are the lives of our women and girls worth?
I sat there and I listened to some of these congressmen, and then the missing and murdered Indigenous women topic came up. And within that topic, we had some of the congressional delegates openly say, well, I didn't support that. I was one of the people that voted against it. And somebody from the crowd asked why, and one that stuck in my head was, how do we define violence against women? How are we going to define that? And when he said that, I was flabbergasted because I was thinking about Savannah Graywin. How are we going to define cutting an infant out of a mother's womb? And they don't think that's violence?
That bill was named after a woman named Savannah. It would require better collection of the data. It would require better coordination between local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and tribal authorities, and it would just make this a much bigger priority.
It was also reported that Senator Lisa Murkowski gave Attorney General Barr a copy of those amendments to Savannah's Act, which is where the Department of Justice's Operation Lady Justice came from. If you compare the two, it's plausible. It's just that they have watered down those recommendations, and again, not assigned adequate funding to effectively implement those initiatives. Conspicuously, they also omitted one of the main proposals, clamping down on the lawless extractive industry man camps that have rightly been called the nitroglycerin of the MMIW tragedy. They then appointed Secretary Bernhardt, a former extractive industry lobbyist, to co-chair the operation.
The proposed MMIW legislation received wide bipartisan support in the U.S. House and Senate. The media reported that the Tribal Alliance's amendments to Savannah's Act heavily influenced the creation of the U.S. DOJ's Operation Lady Justice Task Force, the establishment of interagency law enforcement bodies in each BIA region to achieve interjurisdictional cooperation, and guidelines on ensuring access to culturally appropriate victim services for victims and their families, including the establishment of tribal liaison offices, remain priorities for tribal nations. The Reduce, Return, and Recover Act expands those recommendations to include mandates that will effectively police extractive industry man camps, address human trafficking tracks to port cities where Indigenous women and children are trafficked onto container ships, and a congressional elephant case fix. The Bad Man Act is crafted around a clause from the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty and empowers tribal courts to initiate the removal of non-tribal members associated with gangs and organized crime from tribal lands.
Oliphant was a case that the U.S. Supreme Court issued in 1978, and it basically said that tribes lack jurisdiction over non-Indians. And so with that court ruling, when you look at crimes against Native women as an example, if it's an interracial crime, then the federal government has jurisdiction. And if the crime is interracial, then the tribe might also have jurisdiction. So the problem with that is if the feds decline to prosecute those cases, you've got a situation where you have a non-Indian man maybe hurting an Indian woman, and if the feds don't prosecute those cases, that individual goes free. And so what we saw with the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization in 2013 was an attempt to allow tribes to exercise limited jurisdiction in those instances to be able to prosecute. But it came with a lot of requirements. Tribes that exercise this special jurisdiction have to provide full Bill of Rights protections for that individual that they're trying in their tribal court. So VAWA was huge, and it was an important small way to start untangling that Oliphant requirement.
I continue to fight to expand the reach of the Violence Against Women Act to give you authority on tribal lands to be able to take care of your own jurisdiction. You know, there's an awful lot going on, but I want to make it clear to you. We, in fact, have to change our attitude, the country's attitude toward tribal nations.
MMIWG was, as Deb Holland articulated, a silent crisis. But that changed forever with the release of Somebody's Daughter. When the first cut of the film was finished, we immediately sent copies of it to several lawmakers in the House and Senate we were working with on Savannah's Act and the Not Invisible Act. It's no coincidence that after years of being stalled, both of those bills were recently signed into law. President Joe Biden supported Somebody's Daughter. President Biden's message to us read, "All of the progress we've made on this issue is because of you. You've demanded attention. You've fought for changes to the law, and you continue to fight for the authority to ensure justice and fairness for everyone in your nations. I am grateful for and inspired by your courage.
I think that there are individual pieces of things that have been looked at, data collection and other pieces, but I think it needs a very comprehensive and strategic look at it. And I think we need to figure out how to coordinate all the different entities that work on these issues and really do a much better job, because the statistics are incredibly shocking when you look at the numbers of Indigenous women who are facing violence and, of course, murder. I mean, it's appalling, and I think we all need to do better.
Here in Canada, there's been a national inquiry into the missing and murdered women issue, and what the Commission stated is that this is a deliberate act of genocide. This is a continuation of genocide. The war against Indian and government has never ended. There's one thing after another. Residential schools was after the prisoner of war camps reservations. And then there was the 60s scoop and the fostering system of removing Native children and putting them into non-Native families to try to continue the Assimilation Act. Kill the Indian, save the man. I really think that there needs to be unification of action, alliances, understanding between the governments and between our Indigenous leaders on Turtle Island. Turtle Island meaning North America. We don't acknowledge the borders, so we should be collectively coming up with a solution. The solution is identical anywhere on this continent. It happens everywhere.
With the Global Indigenous Council, we have been working on a national billboard campaign to help bring awareness to the different states and individuals and communities that don't really understand what the MMIW movement is about. That billboard campaign has really highlighted the efforts put forth to initiate bringing data and research and better efforts to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls epidemic. It really brings identity to the MMIW crisis, because when you see those billboards, you do begin to question, what is that? What is that movement about? So it gives us the opportunity to initiate or execute the information that we need to get across the line of decolonizing data, helping to better collect the data, and to bring better coordination efforts from different areas of jurisdictions and departments that need to uphold their end.
I think grassroots community movements are crucial for making a difference in Indian country. I think programs like the House of the Moon are really critical for giving young Native women the confidence they need to navigate this world. And, in addition to any kind of physical training, just really focusing on educational opportunities, because they go hand in hand. And I know that those two things coupled together, strong minds and strong bodies, really will make a difference in making sure that Native communities continue to be strong and thrive and be led by Native women.
In today's world, it's very important for Indigenous women and girls to take the initiative for self-defense. I think young girls should be introduced to self-defense techniques as early as they can. That will keep them safe. That will give them the knowledge that they need to know in order to react to people that are trying to steal them or that are trying to take them. The reason women and children, families won't come forward is because they are scared. They're scared of retaliation against them or their families. They don't want to put their families in jeopardy. They've been threatened. They've been told not to say anything. They've been told that if they say anything, their families will be harmed or killed.
You don't have to be scared. If you know something's wrong, you just go and tell. You just, you go and speak to the right people. And if they're not gonna listen to you and they're not gonna do anything about it, well, get up and do something about it. Make that awareness. Go out and make a march. Go out there, walk. Go out there, hold signs. Get together, band together, because that's what we need. We need something like that. And I'm proud of people that are doing that. I didn't even know about MMIW until my sister was murdered, because it was never really spoke of.
I think social media and internet safety is a huge part of our outreach to schools that we're developing currently.
They promise them they'll take them out and get them a job as a rapper, a model, and they suck them into that. Now, for a couple of days, they'll provide them good meals, hotel rooms, and then the next thing they're out doing what they do, prostituting them, and they suck them in that way, and then they shame them.
I've had 2 cases in which pimps from out of state have met local girls on social media and sent them plane tickets and tried to get them to leave. And in one case, one did. In the other case, the parent was monitoring the social media and prevented her at the airport from leaving. So as far as internet safety goes, I think parents really need to be aware of what their children are doing. And I really don't think there's any positive reason to let your teenage daughter or son, but especially your daughter, have access to the internet, their phone, in the privacy of their bedroom at night.
We're living during a prophecy right now. It was said that there's going to be a time of incredibly great darkness, and it's going to be the women that have to take the responsibility of healing the men. But if the women are broken, the women have to heal first. So there needs to be a movement where we're supporting women healing. And strong women will give birth to strong men.
As a grandmother, this issue is very scary to me, and it's very, very concerning. I have 6 granddaughters, and I have 1 great-granddaughter, and I have a grandson as well. And they're all potential victims.
I keep Ashley's story out there in her name and keep searching for her, because there is a Ashley on every reservation in the whole United States. There's a story about a girl going missing, a man going missing, being murdered and not found.
We'd have a different reaction if this was non-native. I'm just telling you, it'd be a different reaction.
We have so many cold cases here on the reservation that we have no answers to.
They always say that you can go to the reservation and get away with murder, and I do believe that's true.
It's women, it's children, and it's our LGBT community that are being targets. And, they're trafficked, murdered, violence. Somebody's feeling anxiety and stress. They vent that out on the vulnerable because they don't want to take that home to their wife or their girlfriend, their partner. So they throw it on an Indigenous person or the LGBT community. And I mean, they're beaten to an inch from their death. I've seen some of the people, and it's horrific. But there's no penalty for it. So we're constantly learning that it's okay to violate Indigenous people in this country.